Hi, everyone. This is Marilyn Bradford, and I would like to welcome you to my Left Turn podcast. What is your left turn? Writing a blog, parenting in a different way, letting go of the old because you are aware of something greater. Left turns are choices we can all make. It's about a willingness to step into the unknown in any area of your life, to trust yourself, to risk creating or trying something new. It's about letting your true uniqueness shine. The greatest people who have lived, artists, statesmen, writers, explorers, musicians, have all been people willing to turn left. What capacities do you have that you have not acknowledged? What would your life and the world be like if you were willing to turn left? Welcome, everyone. I'm Marilyn Bradford, and I'm very glad you're joining me for another edition of the Left Turn podcast, where we follow what we know to be true and to heck with anybody else. And I have an amazing woman today with me, Susanna Mittermaier, who is the creator of Pragmatic Psychology, which has turned psychology just upside down on its head for so many people and given them so much freedom from this reality's definitions and conclusions, and you got to do it like this. She's the author of many books, including Pragmatic Psychology. She's an access consciousness facilitator, worldwide speaker, and a woman with lots of energy and fun and happiness, which she brings to everything she does. So welcome, Susanna.
Thank you for having me, Marilyn. I love the introduction.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like being incurably happy. It's just amazing. I love it. So if you're looking, just reviewing some things in your life, what are some of the major left turns you've had? What did you learn? What gifts were they? Wherever you would like to start.
Family. Yeah.
Family, that's a good one.
So that came to mind first. I grew up with a very, very normal family, whatever that means, mom, dad, only child, and very protective and very point of view about a projection of how life should be, very it's gonna do studies and then she's gonna have the usual way of living. And I remember that when I was done with high school, that was the big question of now what, as it is for most people. Right. And as it is for most creative people, no clue of what we want.
Right.
And it was the same for me. I had no clue what I wanted because I was so good at knowing what other people wanted and what they needed from me and what was right for them and good for them. And so there I was like, what does one do? And so my mom's idea was, you can become a teacher. It's always good. It's safe. You have a job.
Safe, right.
Yes, right. And you have a lot of vacation and all that jazz. And so I'm like, yeah, I don't know anything else. Let's do whatever her idea is. And so I started to become a teacher. I almost finished education, actually. Just at the end, I had this thing of, I need to explore something. And so there was this possibility to going to Sweden and doing a semester, a term there. And that changed everything for me. Getting out of that box of what I was used to be in, that was something where I'm like, oh, I had to explore myself. And I had that one time before when I was 16, I got my parents to allow me to go to the States, to America. I grew up in Austria, and to go to a high school there in Houston, Texas.
Wow.
which was a big deal because, you know, there was no internet at the time. There was no phone, like you could just text or anything. You had old school letters that you write and post, and it takes forever to send them,
Right.
you know, back in the days. And so it was a big deal. Like if we let her go to the States and go to school there, what's going to happen? But that was the same as later in Sweden, where I'm like getting out of that box, getting out of that usual context.
Mhm.
I'm like, oh my God, like there was a sense of freedom, a sense of, wow, what do I really desire? And all those questions were starting to flow in. And that was like one of the first times where I realized, I can create my life. Ho ho, you know, my only choice is not just to do whatever someone else wants me to do or do the right thing, but really do what seems egotistic, you know, like, but what is so right for me.
Yes.
And this was for me a big deal, you
It's
know,
a big deal, Susanna. Yes. To choose against what your family and your parents, the culture says. It is a big deal.
yeah,
That's
it
a
is.
real turn. Yes.
Yeah. And then like again, like all those, like, you know, when the people you love have so many projections on how your life should be, and then you go, I hear what you say, but I gotta do something else for me. And I did this many, many times in my life and still do probably. But it's like, it's so freeing. And it's, for me, I learned it's not an exclusion. We don't exclude them, but it
Mhm.
might seem for them that we exclude them. But like this family construct for so many people is like the either I exclude them and include me, or the other way around, I include me and then they exclude it, rather
Yes.
than we can have it all, you know,
Yes.
and it doesn't
Yes.
matter whatever their points of view are. So yeah, yeah.
So what happened in Sweden?
In Sweden, what happened was I I didn't continue, like I didn't do the last term of my school teacher education,
Right.
which is like typically, you know, creative humanoid person, you're like quitting, like something else shows up right before you're done. And you're like, oh, bright and shiny, something else. Who cares about finishing? And then I I was just like really for the first time in the search, what would
Yes.
I like? And I studied philosophy, did that for a while, wasn't fun. I studied linguistics, not fun. And then I asked even more, okay, I've done so many things now. What would I really, 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 really desire? And I started to write down some of the aspects. Okay, what makes me happy? And it's
Mhm.
like something with people where the joy that I know is real is something I can invite them to, where it's not all about problems, but it can be about, you know, life can be about something else. And then I looked in the book of university studies, because that's the reference point
Mhm.
I had, you know, about creation at that time. And I'm like, okay, looked at all the different studies, and nothing came close to that. The closest that I found was becoming a psychologist, which then later, and I started to study that education, and what turned out was like, oh my God, that's not at all like what I studied there was not at all what I thought it would be. Um, but somehow I finished that education, which is a big surprise for me personally, because I'm like, I somehow know I have to finish this one. So I made myself do that. And then I got a job first at a child oncology department, and then later at psychiatry. And when I was working in child oncology, my supervision psychologist that were supposed to, you know, she got sick. So I had to take over the whole department.
Wow.
And I'm like, I was not like, there's no study that prepares you for this. Like there's no education that prepares you for that, you know, situation. The only thing I could use was me, like me as a person. You know,
Yes.
when you learn therapy and all that stuff, you're like, oh, when this situation occurs, then this, when this, then this. And then you're like, okay, there's children dying, there's children being sick. You have all these parents being like stressed out, you know, nurses, doctors, just like drained of energy. Now, that was my job to take care of them, like parents, kids, and staff.
Yes.
And I'm
Wow.
like,
It's a big
hi.
thing.
Hello. I'm a very young psychologist. My job is to contribute to you. Okay. And so I really was like, I had to be in the question. I had to use me and what I be. That's the only thing I could do.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. It was wonderful to be thrown into this extreme situation and just learn to swim and learn to be with people, like really being present with them, not
Yes.
having any like filter of this is what you do in this situation, but okay, talk to the person, like engage with them. That was really, yeah, pretty cool thing to experience. Yeah. And then after that, it was psychiatry and people with different diagnoses, which was also totally different than I thought it would be, like coming from the university therapy thing where there's a problem, fix it point of view. And my job was to do, a lot of testings and then fix them with therapy. And it was so extremely boring to do that
Yes,
job.
I know what you mean. I'm also a psychotherapist. So, yes, the traditional way is so boring.
Wow.
Think by numbers therapy.
And then the IQ tests were like, I mean, it's so funny because I had all these people who were like super creative, and then there is a certain set of answers that are right, and only then you get points, right? And then you have these people who go, "How about this?" And I'm like, "I love your answer. Oh my goodness, it's so creative," but they didn't get any points, right? So so funny what they measure. Yeah. But what I learned is again to engage with people. Because even though my job was to find a diagnosis, I'm like, I have to change this way of working with therapy and testing that makes it valuable for the patient, that is makes it worth their while, where they, if they want, can get an awareness or they can learn something about themselves. So I probably didn't do it the right way, most probably, but like when there were different multiple choices, I'm like, hey, what do you know? What's the first thing that pops? Like I started to use those tools that we know from Access Consciousness, and like, okay, so rather than what do you think, where you have to calculate and feel wrong, what do you know is correct here? And so we started to explore that, and they're like, oh my God, I'm not as stupid as I thought, because that situation is so stressful when you get tested and you have a time, and within that time frame, you have to answer this question. So people got stressed and then they're supposed to be smart, which is just so not kind. And so I'm like, okay, so people were like realizing there's something called knowing, or other people call it intuition. And it's a valuable thing. My thinking is not as valuable as this knowing thing. And this was the first steps where this, what you mentioned before, the pragmatic psychology life form started to take form, and I'm like, wow, now it's getting fun. Now it's starting to, go into direction where it's about empowerment, where it's about what's right about you, not what's wrong about you, where it's about possibilities rather than problems. And I'm like, my heartbeat started to be like, I started to be happy again about my job, because I was about to quit. I'm like, either this changes
Yes.
or I, I find a different job, whatever it is. Despite so many years of investment of education, this has to change, because that can't be it. So yeah, this was one of the steps.
So, how did you find Access and how did that influence pragmatic psychology?
So this was exactly at that time when I had either this changes or I
Yes.
find something else. The request of universe, just something, and how we're so powerful that we usually don't acknowledge. Like when we know something needs to change, we pull it in, we create it, even if we don't know how. And that's what occurred. Like I took some days off and I didn't know why. And exactly at those dates, there was someone coming from America who did a bars class and I think foundation at like in like days, how do you say, consecutive days. And I'm like, okay, let's start. I don't know why, but I need to go there. So I started with the bars class. And I'm like, oh my God, that is so strange. I don't get it. I'm kind of upset because it doesn't make sense, but I love it. So it was this little conflictual universe of my brain was like, come on, you've studied this, and there's someone coming from America talking about quick change. Like, in Europe, it's a little bit like they say, oh, how typical Americans, everything is quick and fast, but it has to be complicated. That's the true value, right? So,
That's the end of value.
yes, you have to
Complicated.
work for it. It's not that easy. So that's the culture I was trained to. And then that was a little bit challenging, but then something in me loved it. It opened up something, it acknowledged something in me that I knew was true. So I'm like, what do I have to lose? I'm just going to go for it. And so I chose to do the foundation class also. Or it wasn't called that back in the days. It was a different name.
Okay.
Yeah. And it just like, I remember sitting there, tears running down my face, going, oh, somebody's talking about what I always knew was true, And it was such an acknowledgement of me in a way that I've never experienced. And I'm like, okay, this is so cool. So I was becoming this nerd of using these tools all the time. I was never that nerdy in school, but with this, it suddenly made sense. So I used the tools like all the time. And after the class, I went back to the psychiatric office where I worked. And it was so strange because I was the only one knowing about how easy everything can be and these new possibilities. And I'm like, I could sense nobody can hear it. And I'm like, and there was no podcast at that time. There was almost no books. There was like not the buffet that we have now. When you finish a class, you can talk to people and there's like this lots of stuff going on. At the time, Marilyn knows this, we were like, okay, now you are with this pretty much alone, where you live. And then, okay, what are you going to do? So I took my manual with me all the time. Like it was a very thick, foundation and bars manual. And I had it on my desk and I'm like, I will go for this no matter how difficult everything seems around me, no matter how heavy people are around me. This is happening. And so I used the tools, like every time I would go more contracted, I would go to the toilet and go, okay, what tool can I use here? Expand out. Okay, expand out. Okay. Or pot and pock or whatever. And I would use it and then I would go out and I feel light again. And that would last maybe 10 minutes because I would meet someone and they would talk about their, their stress. And then I would contract again. I go to the toilet again, do it again. Okay, that lasted 15 minutes. Someone comes up and talks about their stuff. We need to work more. And I'm like, okay, no, that's not light. That's not what's true for me. Go to the toilet again, do it again, and I did it again and again. And then that lightness could prevail longer and longer and longer. And then at one point it's like, okay, this is me. I can be this whatever's going on around me. And that was fabulous, like to experience this. And then I'm like, okay, so much is changing in my life, like money, relationship. How about if now that I've been my own guinea pig for a while, how about if I now look at a way of applying this to my work with my patients? And this is where everything changed. Yeah.
How did it all change?
Well, before, when I did normal therapy, used to be so tired. I was to be so drained out of energy. And after every workday, I could only sleep. On the weekends, I didn't have a life because I was so tired. Because the perspective I was taught was like have like a, how do you say, like a protection, protect yourself from
Barrier.
the
Yes.
barrier. Yes. Have a barrier, protect yourself because these people come with all kinds of problems and they're going to suck you dry and they're going to need so much. So you need to have barriers and protect yourself. And oh my goodness, that took so much energy. Plus the conflictual universe of my job is to save them, which is like, wow.
Yes.
That was like a paradigm of like no possibility, no playground for change. So with these tools, I realized, there's a different way of doing it. I don't need the barriers. I don't need to protect myself. I can be present with them. I can receive whatever is going on. All of it contributes to me because I get so much awareness, what they say beyond the words. the energy that I'm aware of, which is a valuable thing, which is not in normal therapy. It's about the words, not about anything else. And then suddenly it's like, wow, I have a totally, like, it's so much more resource available in every conversation. And I can be present with the person, and I can guide them in a way where it's not about the problem, but the possibility. And it's all getting so empowering, and so much change was suddenly available. And my colleagues, they were noticing that, and they would send me their clients that they didn't know what to do with, but they say, don't tell us what you do, because that was too challenging for them. Like, that would challenge their points of view so much in their paradigm. They're like, that is too much. Don't tell us what you do. Just, take them.
Just do it.
Just do it. Do whatever you do. Yeah. So that was really cool. And I must say, it was so cool to learn how honoring it is to not tell people what they're not interested in.
Yes.
Because when we're excited, we're like, everybody needs to know this. Everybody needs to know this, because that's how we learn caring is. But then realizing, no, shut up. Like, that can be so caring as well.
Yes, absolutely. So now pragmatic psychology has gone all over the world. How has that been? What has that created? What are you aware of with all of that?
Oh my goodness. When I started, I never thought that anyone else would be interested in it. And when I wrote the first book, I'm like, when it was published, I'm like, I don't want to know. I don't want to read anything on the internet, because probably people will throw me in exile, or they will throw tomatoes at me, because this is so different. So for a long time, I didn't read any reviews, because I'm like tried to avoid. And then, at some point I couldn't avoid it anymore. And I'm like, wow, this is valuable. But it was challenging to get it out there, because I knew that there might be people who are upset, because it's such a different paradigm. But I knew I had to weigh a little bit. So what's more valuable to me, their judgments or the future it creates? Okay.
Yeah.
So I had to make a choice, and I'm like, okay, you know what? The judgments are not as relevant as the future this will create.
Mm-hmm.
So and it did and does more than I thought, and people using it all over the place, and we have now like people that are educated in this. They're called the pragmatic practitioners, who take like the pragmatic psychology classes, and they are using these tools in their field, whatever
Yes.
they do, like their teachers or their parents or their doctors or therapists. And it's like spreading out there in the world, which is really, really, really cool. And they do it their way, and that's just so wonderful how, pragmatic for me means like taking it easy, like doing what works. Don't worry about getting it right. It's like when you deal with your children or whoever, it's like people always try to get it right. What would my parents do? What would this expert do? It's like, what do you know?
Yes.
What works, even if it seems wrong, do what works. Allow it to be easy or ease filled, because that's always gonna create more. You focus on the possibilities rather than the problems.
Wow. So if you were going to give the audience a tool or two, or just some suggestions for creating greater ease, for that incredible happiness, what would you say to people?
So for me, one of the most valuable things is the exploration, the journey to find out what's true for us.
Uh-huh.
We've been so brainwashed to know what the world thinks and what people judge as right and wrong, and doing what's good for other people or for our image, which is also about other people. The image is
Yes.
always about other people. But one of the greatest and satisfying journeys is to find out what's true for us, which most probably will be very different or might not fit the rightness and the wrongness of this reality in this world. But oh my goodness, when we know what's true for us and we enjoy that and we trust that, we are the boss, we're the leaders of our lives, and we become the leaders of the world and the inspirations for others. And then whatever's going on in the world, as stress, as drama, as insanity, it's not going to have an effect on us. And then we create a different future that works for us. And that's what I would like to see more of.
Yes, exactly. And if someone says, Susanna, how do I know what's true for me? What do you say? How do you, what kinds
Yeah.
of things do you offer people?
Well, it always starts with the willingness to be curious, like
Yes.
start being curious and hey, I might not have any clue because I spent my whole life doing what other people need me to do. Okay, just start what is true for me. And then be with that question. Let it be in the back of your world, working and doing its job, because those questions, they already like they do the job for you also.
Yes.
And then what I love is whatever does for you, whatever creates more lightness and relaxation, that tends to be true for us. So that's a little navigation tool you can
Yeah,
use.
absolutely.
Whatever makes you go relax or happy or makes you feel alive, that's a cue. That's a cue. That's a sign for you to know, oh, that's what's true for me. For example, last week I was in Costa Rica at El Lugar, one of the most beautiful places, and I was riding my horse and I'm like, oh, I feel so happy and so alive. So I know, okay, riding a horse, that is where I access this energy of me being me. Okay, cool. What else? What else? What else?
Very lovely. Well, thank you so much, Susanna. It was a pleasure having you, and I think this will inspire a lot of people to begin that search of what's true for me and to not be afraid to not do what everybody else thinks is right. So thank you
Wow.
very much for coming on.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you for leading this so graciously. Wow.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for joining this episode of Left Turn. I wonder what embracing left turns could create in your life. What magical possibilities might show up. Remember, when you choose left turns, you are joining a group of the most creative and brilliant people the world has ever known.